Hello, everyone, and welcome to another podcast of the sensory approach to manual therapy.
How are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
It's been so long.
August?
Well, I mean, we saw each other at Mount St. Anne in August, but then you still had a pretty big end of the season ahead of you.
Yeah.
Oh, that sums up so much of what I want to talk about today. That response. So I just want to give a little introduction of why I wanted to ask you some questions today specifically. So the old podcast that I used to do these like 20-minute snippets on anything that relates to the human body. So we did one on collagen, I did one on pain, I did some on skin and long-term potentiation, memory, all these kinds of things like that. But what I started doing the more I was teaching classes was I started coming across this term called allostatic load. And allostatic load refers to the accumulation of events and life stresses. And that's it. So it kind of encapsulates every aspect of your life. And then we have something called allostatic overload, which is the moment those stressors and life events become overwhelming. There's this biochemical process that occurs inside of our body that in athleticism, in your industry, what you would traditionally say this is called burnout. But we have psychological burnout, we can have emotional burnout, mental, spiritual burnout, and physical burnout. We can have all of them at the same time. Historically, people talk about them as separate terms, but really they're one unique subject that kind of all intermingle. So the reason I want to talk to you about it is because your sport and your past and your past few years, not just your sport specifically, all high-end athletes have this concern, but the fact that you travel from Australia to Europe for half the year, the fact that you leave your friends and family behind for half the year, the fact that you then have the pandemic to travel through, the fact that the Olympics fall in the pandemic years. I mean, there's a lot going on. So that's one of the reasons why I want to talk to you. Sound good? So I'm going to introduce the podcast, and then I'm going to let you introduce yourself. I'm going to let you summarize I'm going to let you summarize. Okay, I will introduce you then as well.
That part.
But I'll let you summarize, like I wrote in that message, I'll let you summarize the past 3 years of your life. You can hit on the high points and low points, whatever you want. Okay.
Oh, that's no pressure.
There's no pressure. You and I have known each other nigh on almost 12 years now. Yeah, almost 10 years now, actually. So we can also keep it pretty relaxed and chill. Last time I did a podcast like this, I talked about pooping my pants. Okay, so we can be relaxed.
More than I do.
So for my listeners who don't know, welcome to the Sensory Approach to Manual Therapy podcast. This is Rebecca Henderson, who I met in 2012 and who I had the fortune to work with for 3 seasons at Trek Factory Racing. And then I also had the fortune to work with Team Australia. And honestly, she's become a dear friend of mine. And she's had a unique surge to the top of the mountain bike industry. She is a 3-time Olympian, right? 3-time Olympian for Australia in mountain biking. She is former World Cup leader for mountain biking. She's multiple World Cup winner. She's under 23 World Cup leader and World Series winner. She's multiple under 23 World Cup winner. She's Commonwealth gold. Not gold. Okay. Oceania gold several times. Yeah, she's done a lot. She's got a good athletic resume there. And the past few years for mountain biking has been a unique time with the pandemic, traveling and having to deal with a lot of the isolation and try to travel as a bubble. And so I really wanted to talk to you about really how you've coped with some of these stresses, and also for us to go over what some of those stresses were for you. Yeah.
I'm ready.
So why don't you tell me a little bit about, so let's go back to, I think it's 2000, is it 2018 when you get third in Mount St. Anne, or 2019?
19.
2019, you get third in Mount St. Anne. You and I are working together. You're there with Australia. It was a bit of a surprise, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think actually that whole season was a bit of a surprise. The season before, I just joined the team that I'm with now, and I
Which
had
is, you can plug.
Prima Flor Mondraker Genuines. But yeah, so I joined them in 2018 and actually didn't even see out the season. I was not well, and yeah, actually I had stopped, I think, after half a World Cup season, and then came back in 2019, and at the second World Cup was super surprisingly back in the podium, and then saw out the season with a bronze at the World Champs. So yeah, it's was a big surprise.
Yeah, and so at that race, sorry, I'm just writing my wife to tell the kids to be a little quieter when they run around upstairs. Sorry. When we were at Mont St. Anne, and you suddenly found yourself in a podium position, and then you found yourself with one lap to go, you found yourself leading the race. And then you kind of hit a wall and started, I don't know if you went backwards. You went backwards 2 spaces, so it's not like you went back far, but within the space of one lap, time-wise, it was a pretty significant change of pace. And so that would be an example of what we call allostatic overload, where it's purely physical, meaning your body is given up. You don't have the fuel to match the energy demands that you're asking of it. But mentally, what happens to you when you find suddenly you're looking at your heart rate monitor, you're looking at your speed, you're looking at your cadence, and you're realizing everything's changing in a way that you don't want. And you also have this thought process, oh my God, I'm one lap away from winning my world championship. Mentally, how do you keep yourself still even just pedaling to get third place? Because physically you go through fatigue, but mentally and emotionally, where do you go?
Yeah, that was a crazy race for me, obviously, because I was in a position that I was not expecting before the start. And yeah, I mean, I raced different to how I usually did, and normally I'm quite conservative, and I just found myself in a good place. And yeah, I was in the front all race, whether it was second, third, first, but always in those first 3 positions. And for me, that was just like, wow, where am I? What am I doing? And so I was, when you're used to being in those positions, you're more calm and comfortable. And I think sometimes when it's your first, second, third time being in those positions, you can bring a little bit more than what you have inside, because there's this extra level of motivation, or just like almost this lack of presence, because you just can't believe where you are. And yeah, so I just like, I was passed by Pauline, and then with half a lap to go, Yolanda went past me like I was standing still, and you can see it on the TV. It looks like I'm not moving, but that's one race that I'll never forget, that I gave everything I had inside me. Like, there's few times in your life you can give everything that you have inside, but there was no mind games of I can't do this, or it was just like, you have to survive to the finish. I think it's like when you want something so bad, you can just like push your body to the limit. But again, there's like so few times you can do that. But those kind of moments they don't come around that often.
So speaking of that, that makes me want to jump to this season. And yes, we're going to skip a couple of years there of the pandemic. We'll get back to those. But the reason being is you just described this moment that's memorable. I mean, I was standing in the pit zone, freaking out, watching it on my phone. We were all pretty much losing our mind, because yes, it's not that it wasn't a possibility. We all knew, okay, she's got the potential to be on the podium during this event, but it wasn't exactly projected. And so it was definitely a euphoric moment for a lot of people, and we're all freaking out. And it's like you said, in the moment, you're not really thinking of much. You're just going to this place of give everything you have. This may be your only opportunity. Give what you get. Fast forward to this past season that just finished, and beginning of the season, for those who've never heard of mountain biking or paid attention or don't know who my guest is, out of nowhere, essentially, because yes, you were always a podium hopeful and you've been a podium in the previous season, but you hadn't won a World Cup yet. And come to the first race of the season, new subcontinent, we're in Brazil, boom, you come out, you win the first World Cup, and absolute euphoria, absolute excitement. And then we head to Albstadt, you win the short track, you win the World Cup. We head to Novo Mesto, your podium, mid-season hits. We start losing that ability to be number one in the race. So the question I have is, compared to when you're in Mont Saint and you're getting third, where you're thinking the only thing you have is you give everything you get, you've got this euphoric almost sense to the way you're even describing it. Now you've hit several World Cup podiums as the world leader. You're wearing the world leader jersey. You've won a few World Cups now. And now you're not able to give, even if you are giving everything you have, you are finding that it's now more of a struggle. Does your mind do the same thing? Are you still just in this place of there's no internal dialogue, there's no internal conflict, it's just give everything you have? Go to Andorra where you're getting 2 flat tires. Do you suddenly find yourself having an internal dialogue?
Yeah, I think you have a dialogue every race, I think. There's from the races in the early season where I was winning, I was, it was a calm, calculated, just structured, I know what I'm doing, I'm fine, under pressure, no worries. I was in those early races, I was able to, if I can just maintain this during this lap, next lap, I was very, I could see the race for lap by lap, and everything was under control. And come those later races, I think, the first world, there was always I won 3 World Cups in a row. So there's always going to be one World Cup where I wasn't going to win, right? There was kind of winning streak was happening. And then it was it doesn't matter if it's this one, it's going to come to an end. And the first one that it did was, I knew I wasn't in shape. Well, no, I was still in shape. I finished 7th. But, I was expecting a lesser result, and I was super motivated because my sensations were quite average, but my position was really good. So I was still, I still had that very positive mindset. But yeah, as the season went, it was I got to Andorra and had those 2 flat tires. And I think I was still wearing a World Cup leaders jersey, and my motivation was super high, and I surprised myself with the positions I was riding in, and my feelings were good. So it was still a really positive, despite the race being a disaster and costing me in the end the entire World Cup series. But
let's not dwell on that.
We won't dwell on that. It was very much I've got the World Cup leaders jersey, and for me that meant so much. And it was just get it done. There was no dwelling on, I got a flat tire. It was just keep moving, and and I still felt quite good. So even there at the midpoint, the mentality was still positive. It was there was no time to worry about the flat tires. It was just do what gets the best outcome. And so I pushed myself in that race similar to how I did in, that Mont Saint Anne World Champs. And but yeah, the season I think after that we had a few more European World Cups, and things just weren't going that well. And it started the racing, we suffer so much in racing, but
and you guys had a longer season than normal. You had more races this year.
Yeah, we had 9 World Cups this year, more traveling, and we started about a month earlier. But yeah, and so come that second half of the season, I started to take some hits, and earlier I was able to take on these hits, and it doesn't matter, I'm good, and I was really positive. And then they kept coming, and you know, there's like when you feel good, you suffer and you hurt a lot, but it doesn't matter. You can take it all. But it became like, like the racing got harder and harder, and because I just didn't, when you can win a World Cup, you feel on top of the world, and that feeling was just escaping me, and well, it had escaped me, and like I'm fine with that. That's more than I ever dreamed of, but it was just like it wasn't even the positions. It's just I want these feelings back. I want to feel like I can race my bike well, or like have these positive feelings. And it was just one thing after the other. And, I had a lot of personal problems that I think in the early season, I was able to just like push them aside because I got to Brazil and I won the World Cup and I was the World Cup leader. And then I came to the next two World Cups and won, and everybody was happy and Beck was amazing. And so I think I just like all this other stuff just was kind of pushed to the side or pushed down or not really felt or totally addressed. And I think all of those things started to combine together in the second half of the season. And, like physically, I wasn't really in shape that much anymore.
So let's talk about that for a second, because what happens, like, as most high-end athletes, it's very difficult to stay at the winning peak every event all season long. It's in any discipline, it's rare to see a single athlete win every single event. Doesn't matter the sport, only because everybody tapers at one point, has to recover to climb back up to the top of the discipline again. So in cycling, we know, in mountain biking at least, a lot of people are going to have target events that they want to hit, that they want to win. So for you happen to come out all guns firing, you're winning World Cups beginning of the season, you win 3 in a row, you win short tracks, you're wearing the leader's jersey. Mentally, as you had stated several times on social media and in interviews and on Red Bull, that your energy levels mid-season were projected to be low. That was going to be your projected recovery time to try to peak again for Worlds. So your energy levels start dropping, which is completely normal and expected. But now that your energy levels start dropping, when I talked about allostatic load and the way we look at, the biology of the brain and things like that, some of the things that we start seeing is that there's this real big interconnectedness between emotional, mental, and physical, let alone spiritual feel. So you physically feel strong. Well, then whether you're emotionally, mentally, or spiritually fatigued, those will all rise up to replicate how you feel physically. So if you feel good, if you wake up feeling top of the world, a lot of the mental, emotional, and spiritual things tend to get pushed away, and you feel emotionally strong, you feel mentally strong. Your physical self starts feeling bad. Boom, people they start having replications of depression. They start having replications of lethargy, things like that. And vice versa. Somebody going through a spiritual crisis, a mental crisis, an emotional trauma, their physical self starts feeling really low on the energy scale as well. So now we take into account, okay, you're a high-end athlete. Most high-end athletes are like 1% away from catastrophe or winning, right? So like you're either going to win or you're going to blow up and you're going to finish 60th, but like it's a percentage that makes you able to do that. And it's a very small percentage for the level of athletes who can do that. So physically, your system starts going into slight dip for recovery purposes. Mentally, do you find that season by season, not just this year? Yes, there's personal stuff going on as well, but I mean, this season, if you were to look at it on paper, people might go, this year was exceptionally hard with what you went through personally. But other people might say, no, every year is hard. Like during the pandemic, that's a crisis that is incredibly difficult on the psyche. And so that could almost be quantifiably as intense as what you were going through. It just was a different year. And so as you go through this physical dip in recovery, do you find that year after year, that's also the time where mentally you start feeling like it's time for recovery and you don't get it because you do have to have another race or another event or another training cycle, that even if you want to go and lay down, you still have to go do your intervals or something like that? Does the mental and emotional component line up with that?
Yeah, for sure. I think, for example, to be really at the top, everything has to come together. Like you need all the pieces of the puzzle to, if you're if you feel good, like, normally you get there because everything's sort of supporting each other. Like, you can't be, well, you can, but it's, you're not likely to be depressed, but in the shape of your life. It's just sort of like, you've got to bring all those things together. And I think, when I reflect now, it's like the middle of the season is quite commonly a pretty low point for me, actually. But for the most part, by the back end of the season, I'm able to pull myself together again, if that makes sense, which is, I didn't really manage to do that this year. But yeah, I think for sure. And,
let's not be too hard. Your results near the end of the season started climbing back up again. so on paper, at least, at the end of the season, you were climbing back up.
I think, yeah, like, it's hard to know if you're like looking for reasons or looking for excuses or how it exactly works. But, like once you start to, come down, you start to feel things more, and like, for example, for me, a lot, it was like, oh, maybe I didn't process this separation, or, like, oh, I'm really starting to miss home, or, like these other factors that you either were able to put aside, come back, or maybe you're looking for reasons to justify how you feel. Like, it's, it's a tricky one, but for sure, yeah, I think as soon as one piece starts to fall away, it really does affect the others. And it's something that I'm always reinforcing to my coach, is that I need to be, number one priority is that Beck's happy. Like, I need to be happy and healthy mentally, because it doesn't matter how perfect my training is. If I'm not happy, I'm not going anywhere.
So you bring up exactly what I want to talk about next, which is a question I have for you as a high-end athlete who I've known for a long time now, but who I haven't had a lot of interactions with over the past couple of years since I left the cycling scene and things like that. And one of those is when you do start going into that lower point. So there's annually, for you as a high-end athlete, based on your discipline, there's likely going to be two low points. First is going to be mid-season, if that's your goal, if you peak in the beginning and the end, depending on your preference. And then postseason, once you go into full-blown, 2 weeks, no bike kind of thing. Those are the two areas where your energy levels will taper. And so with it, usually mentally, emotional, and spiritual taper as well. To climb out of those, yes, you can have a training schedule from your coach, all these things like that. You can eat comfort foods, you can, curl up and watch a movie, whatever it is that for individual people. But for you specifically, when you want to climb out of that, what is it mentally and emotionally that you do to trigger, okay, it's time to climb out? Not physically, because like you said, physically, you might have the energy to go do the interval trainings. It's, do you do it heavy-hearted or do you do it lighthearted? And then so mentally, what are some of the components that you use that you've discovered on your own and that you've taken, tried to learn from other humans, or not even humans, but that you've tried to climb your own way out of that hole?
Yeah, for sure. I think it's like sorry, Lenny's
No, your dog is probably one of the things that you use a lot.
He's a good guard dog. Sorry. I think like mid-season is one of the places where I don't think I've really perfected that yet, to be fair. At the end of the season, you mentioned 2-week break. This year I had a 5-week break. That's 5 weeks without riding, without exercise, walking Lenny around the street, but without exercising. Honestly, in that time, I didn't miss my bike, and I think I'm maybe less common than a lot of the other riders who might take 2 weeks, or they'll take 5 weeks, but they ride their bike 3 or 4 days in the week anyway. Like, I'm really an on and off kind of person, and when I take my time off, I take my time off. And this year I came home, all right, the bike's out, and that's the time of year where I can be social, spend time with my friends, spend time with my family. And I think I went 2 weeks without cooking dinner at home because I was just somewhere every night. And, it's just like being completely not an athlete for me is what, helps me a lot. And I my body does feel quite average after that, and it does miss the exercise. And the first day I went back, I was like, the wind in my hair, I miss this, but I need to miss it. And that's enough to sort of fill me up for almost the whole season.
That's postseason, right? Postseason, where you're taking this time off so you can say, I miss it. Mid-season, you can't afford to take that time off, because if you take 2 weeks or 5 weeks, but even 2 weeks off mid-season, you're falling behind your training by, almost a month and a half. And so mid-season, when mentally you want to take that break, I'm so tired of this, especially when it's rainy or it's not nice weather. What tools do you use to bring yourself back to, no, I'm doing beyond determination? Because self-determination is something that any athlete is going to have, that it's a trained attribute. Any human can learn self-determination. It's about repetition of using it, things like that. Not everybody cares to make it a priority. Myself would be a great example of that. I like being athletic, but I would not say a high-end athlete in any way, shape, or form. And so when it comes to not just the ability to be self-determined, I'm going out whether I want to or not, but when it comes to the ability to, I'm going to go out, but I'm going to enjoy it mid-season, where you haven't had that mental break, what do you find does it? Is it going and having a coffee with your friends in the Alps or in the Pyrenees or wherever you're training in Spain? Or is it more time alone? Is it the recovery? Is it getting treatment? Is it speaking to therapists? Is it journaling, reading? Where do you find that ability to mentally reconnect with your passion?
Big question. Well, I feel like the dip in the middle of the season is so different to the one at the end, for example. Like, I would say mid-season, it's not, you get to that hole nearly because you're motivated. Like, it's like, I think in a way you can only drive yourself to that level of like suffering into that hole because you've worked so hard, because you're so motivated. That you've just exhausted yourself. But I mean, like in the middle of the season, you're not like completely exhausted, and I think that was my problem, for example, this year, is like I didn't take quite as much rest as I usually would in these just little pockets of rest, like along the season, that, new coach, lots of variables this year. Carrying the leaders jersey did really impact our schedule for the year, and
your media presence and your time alone, and
I mean, a lot of factors, but I think I still did take little bits of time walking in the mountain, and my mum came to visit, but that's something that's a huge challenge for me, is to get that escape from being on, because even if I have days off my bike, I'm in Spain and generally alone, and it's like, well, it's not that much for me to do here.
Because you still haven't learned your Spanish, right?
And let's not talk about that. But and even the people that I see are all from the bike industry, so it's not like I don't ever really get that switch off, even just for a few days. Like, and so that's something that's as I said, I haven't obviously perfected that.
And do you find that, like, when you're with other people in the bike industry, that, let's say you're not riding bike, you guys are being completely social, you're not in your chamois, it's not training time, you're just completely social. Do you find the conversation still always comes back to cycling, since that's your guys' passion, and that doesn't give you the opportunity to really step away from the sport? Whereas, like, in the off season, you might talk about cycling with some of your friends, but some of your friends probably want to talk paint or dogs or, the stupid magpies, whatever it is. Do you find that doesn't give you the opportunity to step away, because your social network in the season is also the network of people who are going to be around you during competition?
Yeah, it depends who you're with. Obviously, like, it's something that you have in common. It's a natural topic to gravitate towards. But I mean, I have definitely got a few good key people who we don't have to talk about bikes at all, and it's amazing. But I mean, it is a topic that, especially in the season, and like, even if I'm trying to switch off, it's still like maybe I'm switching off, but I'm still trying to be mindful of this, that, and the other. And so it's just impossible to, in the level that I would like, to be totally off. But, you know, at the same time, they're those people that are with me in that half of the year also really understand me as far as like what I'm going through in that time of the year. Whereas I find actually a lot of my friends in Oz don't really know. They support me, they love me, they know what I'm doing, but they don't really, really, really know what's going on, if that makes sense. And
Yeah, if
for
you're
me,
not in the
that's
world, you
also
don't
great.
understand the daily stresses. You don't really get how hard it is to do what you do.
Yeah, and I think also for me, coming home and people not really knowing is so fine. And I just come back and live my life here too, just like that.
So then that brings me to the next part of this that I want to ask you about, which is, let's go back to 2012. Okay, so before you signed with Trek Factory, we just did the London Games. You and I meet in Austria for the first time. Your next season is going to be the Trek Factory Racing. You're going to be U23. You're still in the under 23 category, and your success is quite high. You do very well that year. You win your first race out. You win several of most of the races throughout the season. You podium almost there, I think, every single race. I can't really remember. It's been a long time. And you win the overall jersey. A lot of time in the US, a lot of time in Europe, very little time in Australia, although we do have 2 events there, so you get a little bit of time at home. The level of stress that you were living with at that age, right, comparatively to where you are now, 10 years later, now it's not the under 23 jersey you're wearing, it's the world elite leaders jersey that you're wearing. The level of stress, would you say that year after year, it accumulatively became greater? Because the level of stress that you dealt with this year, post-pandemic, like you mentioned, separation, world leaders jersey, World Cup podiums, different team from when you and I used to know each other, you're with Mondraker now. That accumulation, if I were to look at the two comparatively, it looks visually, like on paper at least, that the stress level you're dealing with now is higher than when we were at the under 23 category together. If you were to take that stress level from U23 to today and go, this is the difference, you know, it would almost seem insurmountable. So to be able to cope with that increase of stress year after year after year, do you find it was accumulative, or do you find that really it was just one day it was always the same and then the next day it was higher and you just had to suddenly deal with it, like going under 23 to elite, or switching teams, or that year in between where you go independent, things like that? Do you find that there was a gradual increase in that stress, or was it sudden?
Oh, definitely very gradual, I would say, to the point like you can go 2 years before that was my first season racing in Europe, and Dan and I went and did it alone, unsupported. And I'd been to Europe for world champs with the Aussie team, but never traveled alone. And it was like, whoa, you know. So I'd been exposed from when I was 18 to this traveling and, you know, doing the best you can, but no idea how completely amateur you were doing it. But you're doing the best you can, and with what you know, that's like I'm doing a good job. And slowly but surely you learn, you get more experience, and like, you know, over all those years, it's just been this really steady progression. Then you join a team. Yes, there's more pressure, and people are looking at you, and you've got like real sponsors that you have obligations to. Then you get a salary, but a lot of the stresses for me were taken away. I was no longer responsible for most of my travel logistics. I wasn't responsible for my equipment, even my, like, you know, the first time I joined the team, I asked the mechanic, hey, where's the bucket? I need to wash my bike. And he just laughed at me. Like, you know, it was this new world of like professional racing. And so there were some increase in stress, but so much responsibility was taken away from me. So like joining a professional team was a huge step for me. And then, yeah, I mean, now this season I was living in Spain alone. I'm driving everywhere alone. But, you know, I've got so much experience now that for me, like, those are not difficult things to do. I think a new experience for me was like coming to each World Cup with everybody talking a lot of gossip about me. And, like for me, that was, it's personal, but yeah, that was
Oh,
like,
you must have loved that.
yeah, as you know, I'm not really a person who likes to be a lot of attention, and definitely is not a girl who likes to gossip. So for me, that was, that's like probably one of the biggest challenges for me. Just like, it's like those first 3 World Cups it was kind of back, and for me that was something pretty heavy
Not
to
back
carry.
related to winning, back related to off-season
Well,
drama.
but just everything, just
Yeah.
all of it combined. I think one wouldn't have come without the other. It was just like there was so much to talk about, right? And so for me, I think that actually really kind of took its toll. I'm so used to flying under the radar, and that's how I like it. I just quietly go about my business, doing my thing. And so it's sort of those things. I'm very good at just getting down, doing my thing, and like I'm not afraid of hard work or challenges but yeah, it's like that was probably a new experience for me. And
So you described something that is well, we'll see over the next couple of years with you, but it's something that is likely, hopefully, going to happen for you, which is, as we have a constant stress in the beginning, that stress represents a large portion of our caloric load, the amount of calories our brain uses to manage said stress. But as that stress becomes habitual and repeatable, but mostly predicted, so I can predict that I will have this level of stress, the easier it becomes to manage. So that allostatic load and overload in the beginning, World Cup winner, separation drama, Rebecca at the center of rumors, that becomes what we call allostatic overload. And then as each one of those components stay in your life for a longer period of time, they just become part of your stress. And so then you learn to deal with them. And in the process, they no longer overwhelm the system. And so the hope for the future could only be that you'll just be at the podium, World Cup leaders jerseys so frequently that that's not the stress. The stress is not wearing it. That's one of the hopes, right?
yeah, I mean,
but it's one of those things where it's that habit, when it becomes predicted, is when it no longer becomes something that is stressful to your system. And I bring that up because the physical forces you guys apply to your bodies are significant. So any high-end sport is going to have a large amount of use on the body, but cycling, mountain biking is particularly aggressive. It's mainly interval training for, an hour and 16 to an hour and 30 minutes. It's really high paced. It's, zone 5 the whole time. And so that physical stress now, when it becomes the predicted, I know exactly how it's going to be, it almost becomes second nature. And so the question is over the course of years for you, compared to, let's say, first year under 23, where suddenly you're exposed to the most high-end efforts you've ever done, to where we are now, 10 years later, are you like, yeah, it's hard. I know it's going to be a hard race. It's obviously going to be one of the hardest things I do, but it's also not so hard that it's scary anymore. Whereas for a lot of people, if they look at that, they might go, no, this is a scary amount of effort that they'd have to put into success.
Well, I think it's like, it's the same like when I was traveling, it was like in the beginning, it was like 5 months, 6 months. Whoa. Now it's like, that's what I do. And it's the same with the racing. Like we've been racing since we were kids. We always like go out and suffer and give it everything we've got. And like, you don't think anything of it. And, racing is always hard. Like, but when you're younger, it gets harder. Maybe you take it easy for a little bit. And like when you get to really the highest level, like you always have to, it's 90 minutes. It's not possible to be at 100% for 90 minutes. You have to manage that effort to finish having given everything 100%. But that's one of those things that you have to be, as I said, you can only really, really give everything such few times, I believe. And like a lot of that for the race is like, you have to face it. Like, this is going to hurt. Like, and you have to know when you're warming up, when you're preparing, like, this is going to hurt. You can't be, I'm used to this. Like, if you're suffering at what's comfortable amount of level, you're not going you're not racing. Like,
You're not
you know
racing.
what I mean? Yeah. Well, you're racing, but you're not racing to where you should be. I mean,
You're racing to finish the race, but not win the race.
it's or for a good position, but if you know what I mean, like you say that we're so used to putting ourselves through that, but I think, you know, like you probably go to 80-90% of the races and you give a lot, but you can't give really everything, if you know what I mean. Like when I'm racing in Oz, of course I suffer, but I don't suffer like I suffered at Mont Saint Anne World Champs. Like, you know, and you have to be, yeah, like there's, for me, it's like I have to really know that this one's coming and I'm ready and I want to suffer. And you have to want to, like, you can't push yourself like that without really, really wanting to.
So speaking of wanting to suffer, let's move to Tokyo Games. So you've hit several podiums that year. I think at the time you were 7th or 6th in the world.
I think my world ranking was 2 or 3 at that
was
time.
2 or 3 at the time. Okay. You would know better than I did because it's been more for longer for me. So you're 2nd or 3rd in the world. You're coming into the Tokyo Games. Obviously a medal hopeful, not necessarily gold, but definitely a medal contender. You're ready to suffer. What happens? Tell us about that.
Yeah, that's it's Olympics is such a funny one. You know, I haven't had my first Olympics was London 2012, was just a total privilege to be there. Achieving the selection was a dream. Come Rio, I achieved the selection. Like I had to achieve your country has to earn a place, and you know it was a process. And I sort of ticked all the boxes and done. There was no one from Oz really threatening to take the spot. Tokyo, I'd come off 2 bronze medals at the World Champs. You know, there was no, am I going? Am I not going? It was like just prepare as best as possible. And yeah, I had pretty like hard experience in Rio, and you know, it really hurt me emotionally. So I think I put my walls up for the Olympics a bit and was like, no, I'm going with a wholesome approach to the season. Of course, the Olympics is coming, but no, I'm going to focus on like doing just a good season overall. And I think, you know, I was a bit cold towards the Olympics because I was probably afraid to get hurt. Like I still trained well. I prepared well, everything the best of my ability, like always. But there was something inside me that I was like, it was like I was expecting to get hurt. I was, you know, like, of course you don't tell these things or think it at the time, but in hindsight, I think I was like, this is like, I'm going to get my heart broken again. And I was afraid of that, or say, I don't know how to explain it.
Yeah, we call it predictive. We call it predictive text, which is, you know, it's, some people would call it manifest destiny, self-fulfilling prophecy, whatever you want. But in memory and in neuroplasticity, we call it predictive text, where we can predict a certain behavior to happen based off experience and exposure. So from your previous experience and exposure, and predictive text occurs not only through repetition of behavior, but also the intensity of the experience. So like sometimes predictive text will happen if you do a mild experience so frequently that it becomes permanent. Other times it'll be a one-time exposure, bit by a snake, but it's so traumatic that every snake you think, I'm going to get bit by a snake. So you predict a bite. So that single experience. So Rio being so heartbreaking creates this predictive text where around, because it's not around a one-day event, because you do well at the 2 previous one-day events, the world champs, you know, you're getting bronze at both of these events. And then, you know, you're doing well at the long season events. So like, it's not around, oh, I can't handle the stress of one day, which some athletes have it's like bad test takers. So we know it's not that. So it's interesting that you're saying that it, you know, you might have almost expected to be hurt. And so for whatever reason, a scenario arises mentally, psychologically, emotionally, physically, or spiritually, where that predictive text gets proven right.
Yeah, for sure. I think like, yeah, it was such a strange one because we were unable to race. There was, COVID was kind of almost behind us, but then at the Olympics it wasn't. And I was thrown again into like a lot of different factors. The team was all in Spain, new staff from Oz, like average support, but these are all things that normally I can adapt to, right? And again, this is like when you're on top, doesn't matter. When you're just not quite yourself, those things start to matter. And like I wasn't my best self, like happiness wise. And, I was there, wow, like, I was motivated, but I think, I can look back and I was just a bit off. And, I went to the race, like prepared the best I could, like always. But yeah, my training laps were probably the race I did in Tokyo a couple of weeks ago, having had 5 weeks off. I think I was probably racing faster. I was just like, the lights were on, but nobody was home. And I was just like, it was one of the most painful experiences because everybody's watching and you're giving a dismal performance. And it's like, you can't hide, you can't pull out, you have to just get it done.
And you don't get to redeem yourself potentially, right? Like it's a once in every 4 years. And how often, like you've gone to 3, that's amazing. You will possibly, in all likelihood, likely go to 4, barring some, really unfortunate change. You will likely go to 4. So you have a chance for redemption if you choose to think of it that way. But for a lot of people, it's like you go and you're like, oh man, I'm not giving the performance I want. And I don't know if I'll ever get to try to give it again.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, for me, it wasn't like so much like redemption is not really a thing for me, but it's like, it's that one, like people in the scene watch World Cups, but it's like people ask you if you went to the Olympics, did you get a medal? No. Oh, like what happened kind of thing. Like that's that Olympic
What
mentality.
happened? I competed against somebody who did.
And it's like there's a lot of actual negativity for me around the Olympics in that respect. And yeah, I mean, it's just like that. It was a fail. And I mean, I failed a lot of times. That doesn't bother me, but I think it's that one that you're almost not permitted to forget. How many times I failed in a World Cup and nobody remembers that specific World Cup, or it's never, but it's something that's constantly you're reminded of again and again and again. And I think,
is that one that you get reminded of by people outside of the mountain bike community more frequently?
Yes,
specifically sure. Because you've got the Olympic rings. They go, oh, this is outside of that. They would never have even noticed that there was a lack of a missed opportunity.
Yeah, for sure. And maybe you're a choker or whatever, like, but for me, that 90 minutes was just awful because it's like my family, they've all, like, everybody makes extra effort to see that race, to support that race. And like, Olympics brings hope, or anything's possible at the Olympics, and like it brings this extra energy and a little bit of magic for you and for the people around you. And I think it's just like,
So let's go back to the beginning of the conversation where you say in Mount St. Anne, you're riding this high and your mind is a blank. You're calculating your pace and you're trying to do your best, but you're not exactly going through mental anguish. Now, fast forward to the Olympics, and it sounds like you're describing there is mental anguish during the 90 minutes now. It's one of the hardest 90 minutes. So it's not only hard physically, which again, you trained for. It's not like your body chose a day to turn off, and that we know of. You didn't have a sickness, right? Like you weren't fighting anything that we know of. So it's not like suddenly your body's wasting calories by fighting an inflammation or a bacteria of some kind. So what's the mental anguish going through? Whereas if in the previous one, you're like, I'm feeling great, the mind's almost empty, all of a sudden now it's anguish. Is that what you find consumes your calories and your energy?
Yeah, I think like you've pretty much, got it there. Like the physical suffering we can do. It's hard, but we're good at that. And like even that emotional suffering, come on, give more, like that, or tricking ourselves that it's not that far, or the top's just there, like those things, that's what we are good at. But when things are not going well, we're still not bad. But when things are just a disaster, it's like, a 90-minute race feels a long time when you're going well. It's an eternity in that case of the Olympics. I would have swore I was out there for 5 hours, and you come through, when you're upbeat and things are good, you see 3 or 4 laps to go. Okay, cool, take a gel, calm. And then, for me, I would barely make it up the climb coming to the finish line, and it was 4 laps to go. Is this even possible? How
You're
am I
hoping
going to
for a
drag
flat
myself?
tire, I imagine, at that point.
It's just how am I going to drag myself around? I suffered physically a lot. I was giving my best on the climbs, but it was I had concrete in my tires, and I just couldn't, it was just, I was descending slow. I was just I was just not myself. And you have a lot of negative thoughts in that time. And it just for me, a lot was just get through this, just make it to the end, and trying to find a way to make it to the end, because that's the only option. There is no, any other race with such a performance, I don't pull out under many circumstances.
Very few circumstances.
Yeah.
So let's
one.
Oh, sorry.
I think that's probably in a usual race when, it's something that probably, the team would have been Beck, pull off, what are you doing? But, it's not good for you. There's a point where it's not good for you, but that's one race where it doesn't matter. You owe it. I don't know who you owe it to, because I also don't believe you really owe anyone.
Because you're the one who put in the effort. Yeah.
But you do. You have to. You owe it to yourself. You just have to. I don't know why finishing, because to me, finishing is not an achievement, but it's the minimum. And it was very painful and hard to do.
So going to what you just said about, there are a lot of races where sometimes you have negative thoughts, but in this specific event, it was hard. So let's move away from Tokyo now, because in that event, you have negative thoughts and you're not able to move out of them. You finish the race and you still have this, downer moment. Other events that you've been in, you've had, let's say, so far in World Championships, you haven't had negative thoughts. It was a great race. This season, you have highs and lows and ups and downs. In the events where you are doing a race and mentally you find yourself going, oh my God, this is not just suffering anymore. This is, I've hit a wall, or some version of, I really wish this was already over, beyond suffrage. During the event, what do you do that makes you not pull out? Is it stubbornness, pride, arrogance, self-control, self-determination, willpower? Is it talking yourself off a ledge? What is it? What tools do you find yourself using that make you go, I'm not pulling out? When every aspect of you, every cell in your body is saying, Beck, pull the fuck out. It's time to be done. And mentally, your brain is yeah, Beck, let's go. Emotionally, I've checked out. What is it that makes you go, no, I'm not? What do you have a trick? Do you have a tool? Or is it just you don't know what it is necessarily?
I would say, fortunately for me, I wasn't never in that situation this year. The responsibility, the burden, the privilege, whatever, of carrying the leader's jersey and being in the overall, in the later season, whether I was wearing it, whether I wasn't, was absolutely not an option. For me, always, every race was, it doesn't matter how bad it is, finishing the best possible position is the only option. And if you're in 60th, you fight to be 59th. It doesn't matter. So I was lucky. I had some really hard days this year where I wanted nothing more than for some of the races to be over, but I had so much purpose. And I think that purpose was really vital for me this year. So pulling out was just not an option, because I had the big picture of the World Cup overall to fight for. And so there was always something behind that race. But, if you're in a World Cup and you're not in the overall, you've skipped a couple, there's some races where for sure I would have been looking for an exit. you know, get me
I
out of
think
here.
I think you hung on to an incredibly important word that really, as an athlete, you guys are almost a little more fortunate than just people who aren't necessarily athletes, in that you have a purpose for you guys. It's very clear cut what the purpose is. It's a race, it's victory, like there's a purpose, right? If you're on a soccer team, it's winning. If you're a tennis player, it's winning. Like winning is the purpose. And once you are winning, it's maintaining the lead. There's a purpose. For people who aren't necessarily doing that, outside of athleticism, it's interesting because in a lot of conversations around burnout, work burnout, especially during the pandemic, like first aid responders and things like that, here in Quebec as well, burnout, like globally, burnout is a big problem in the first aid response post-pandemic. And it's one of those things where a lot of people who haven't felt the burnout, one of the things they often describe, if I have a friend who runs a podcast who focuses a lot on burnout and first aid workers, and oftentimes one of the things we hear described and talked about is a sense of purpose. When we have a sense of purpose, that sense of being mentally, emotionally, physically, spiritually burnt out or exhausted or allostatic overload, however we describe it, tends to be easier to, one, get over, or two, hard to even get to, because the purpose is something, it's goal driven. And so that makes it a very interesting aspect, because for you guys, you have so many set goals. Okay, these are my high peaks during the season. These are the races I'm going to aim to win. This is the overall jersey I'm winning, or a rainbow jersey, whatever it is. And so that sense of purpose is really different. So I think that's really cool. So then move that, the last part of the conversation, which I wanted to ask you, which is self-care, recovery, things like that. Not just, there's the mental, emotional, spiritual aspect, which, we've kind of brushed on a little bit on what do you do, and, friends that you hang out with, trying to, your mom came this year to see you. It was really great to see her on the TV, things like that. What is it that you find yourself doing? Just, you're in Spain, you're on your own, when you're with your team, it's a little different. Yes, there's the added pressure of, okay, the end of the week is going to culminate in a race. I've got my mechanics taking care of my bikes. I've got my manager taking care of my schedule, and I've got my therapist taking care of my body. You're taking care of your food, like there's this whole mixture of stuff, but it's kind of a little circus that runs in a well-oiled machine. Move away from that. What are you doing for self-care? What are you doing, not only mental, which is an important one, but also emotional and also physical self-care? Here we've talked about training a lot, but what are you doing that finds recovery, where you are bringing stuff back into your system?
Yeah, I think probably not enough. For me,
I will point out to my listeners, who are mainly massage therapists, that you are a trained massage therapist. And if that doesn't come up in this sentence, they will be sad. It's okay if it doesn't. I would rather you be honest, because I know you, but they will be sad.
What?
If self-care does not include massage therapy.
Yeah, I think like my biggest self-care is a coffee with friends. That's what I need. And every World Cup, I make an effort to see a couple of friends just to spend some time together. I think, yes, but massage is part of my daily routine at a World Cup. And, I love massage. I love massage. It's like,
you don't have to suck up to my listeners.
No. I'm not sucking up. For me, it's,
you did finish massage school. I believe you.
Yeah. But in the beginning of the season, it's amazing. But honestly, by the end, it was like, I don't know if I feel like a massage. Like I go once a week now, and that's like, it's such a treat. But sometimes, like in a race week, like, I don't want a massage today. Like whether it's because I can't be bothered, or like it's no longer a treat. And it's, so I think like, yeah, I mean physically, like there's not that much else to do. I mean, I'm for sure there is, but yeah,
no,
I
like
think
some people do yoga, some people take hot baths, some people walk in the, but honestly, none of that. I don't care if you do any of those. It's interesting though that you say some days you don't want a massage, because one of the things that I teach in my classes with the sensory approach is less is more. And it's really, sometimes people want a massage and it feels good. And then after 20 minutes of getting a massage, it doesn't feel good anymore. It's kind of like, stop touching me. What was that?
That doesn't happen to me.
No, but for some people, it's like, stop touching me. And so like you described earlier, like it's near the end of the season. Sometimes like, I don't really want a massage today. And it's just interesting because sometimes that level of stimulus, even though it's a positive influence, right? It is theory, it's a positive, we're trying to recover, is still so much that it fills up that allostatic load where you're like, it's kind of not worth it today.
Yeah, for sure. Like early season, I look forward to it. And then like in the later season, it's like, I mean, it's not a hard thing to do. You go there, you take your pants off and you get a massage and suddenly it feels like another chore.
Another responsibility.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Imagine how the therapist feels. See, it's funny. That's how I feel about working out. Oh, it's another responsibility. Oh, I got to get on my bike again. Oh, that's awesome. Well, hey, we've already gone over what I promised you we would do, which was only 60 minutes. So I just want to say thanks. I'm so appreciative to reconnect with you, Beck. I mean, I've known you so long now. You've become a dear friend of mine. And it was great to see you at Mount St. Anne this year. It really was. I mean, I can't believe we sat in silence for almost a half hour. Hadn't seen each other in 4 years, but it was amazing, or 3 years, but it was wonderful. It was amazing to it was such a cool experience for me, right? Like it was a really cool experience. And I just want to say, I hope this gets some of my followers interested in following you at least, because you've been a big part of my professional career and my personal career as well. So I just want to say it's great. Thank you for making the effort. I'm really hoping that this will turn into a series of episodes where I get to interview high-end athletes more frequently, because I want to ask them these exact questions that you kind of went over about yourself today, which is, during an event, how do you manage stress? And after an event, how do you manage stress? And also after the highs and lows, how do you manage it? And when the season's over, how do you manage it? Because most humans who go through some version of burnout or depression or fatigue, they're dealing with it from this cumulative effect where you guys are doing the same thing, but because you are purpose driven, it tends to remove some of that load. And that's a really cool thing that you pointed out that I think I'm really going to hang on to, that purpose driven thing, because that makes a big difference on being motivated to keep going and removing yourself from that burnout and digging your way out of that hole.
Or into it.
Or into it. Yeah. Let's hope that's not the goal, right? Purpose driven to the point of, again, it's like, if you end up doing something so much, you're so motivated to do it that it just takes away from all the joy, then it's no longer purpose driven. Now it's just a chore. Awesome. Well, I hope you have a great day today. Thanks so much, Beck. Thanks for waking up early to do this with me.
Waking up early. We started at 9.
Yeah, but you're in your off season. You're in your off season. And well, I will reach out to you again later this winter just to say hi again, because I love hanging out and talking with you, Beck.
Awesome. Thank you, Troy.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.
There's a time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, upon all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.